The OG case here is just going to be pretty simple. Just going to talk about why regulation is quite insufficient and bad in this, and thus it ought be banned. And then secondly, why the market incentives are naturally just bad in and of themselves. I think firstly, in terms of why regulation in and of itself is insufficient, firstly, let's analyze the types of people who are the third parties that are likely to be buying these insurance policies in the first place. Note that these are typically people from investment firms, like different types of investment brokers. I think the reason for this is that firstly, they have the large amount of capitals in order to be able to pay upfront for these life insurance policies. These life insurance policy payouts tend to be quite large insofar as like death and healthcare costs are extremely expensive, which like insurance policies reimburse you for. So this, the cost is going to still be relatively large, although it comes at a discount. And it's typically the idea that a lot of just like regular people don't have enough money to do this. So it's likely just like firms and like investment banks with the large amounts of capital. Secondly, though, I think it's also just a way that is easy for them to be able to make and secure profit. That is to say that this is a definite asset insofar as someone with a chronic or terminal illness is likely to experience death, not even just necessarily within the short term, although which it is in most cases, but they're most definitely they're most like definitely going to die in a way that is necessarily quite unpreventable, meaning that the payout is likely to be large, and this is a secure way for them to be able to make a large amount of investments and profit to come back from this. I think thirdly, though, it's actually just a way that they're able to diversify their investment portfolios. That is to say, investors invest in all sorts of things and do all sorts of things to be able to make a lot of money, and thus they likely like go into a wide branch of places. And I think like this is why this is probably something that they would go to, even though it's things like in the healthcare industry and things like this as well. But I think fourthly, it's just the idea that the premium that they have to pay for the rest of the payout is relatively small compared to like the payout that someone has, especially in the case of a terminal illness in which people are in places like hospice experiencing near death, which is probably the situation a lot of patients are when they're coming to like take out these types of payouts within and of the first place. Are there any clarifications on this? Cool. So secondly, then, in terms of why like regulation is simply quite insufficient. One, the types of investment firms that we're talking about are people with large amounts of capital, large amounts and diverse like portfolio investments, meaning that they often do things like they invest and help in like state infrastructure projects, like building like roads and things like this as well. But also they just have a large amount of capital, which gives them capacity to be able to lobby governments and to stop regulations from coming and being sufficient, doing things like promise to like fund politicians' campaigns and things like this. Also doing things like being able to like promise and offer like donations and investments into state projects, which are often very expensive, which relieves the state of having to go into debt, which is very good for them economically, but also as their credibility as politicians, meaning that the state has every incentive to want to buy into the lobbying power that these investment firms do to stop this industry from happening. But I also think it's just the fact that these people are necessarily well connected, have lots of experience, and know like very like well connected people. They likely know a lot of people who are working in the financial regulation sector and all these types of things as well. Meaning that apart from like knowing the states who imposes regulations, they probably know people on regulatory bodies which are more disconnected from this, more disconnected from the state, and are thus more susceptible to things like lobbying, bribery, and like other things of this type of nature. But also, thirdly, I think it's just simply necessarily an extremely small industry that doesn't have a large capacity to grow. I think the reason for this is that there's just statistically not a large amount of terminally ill people, but like medical and healthcare trends show that there isn't necessarily an increasing trend in the amount of people who are getting certain types of chronic or terminal illnesses, meaning that there's no suggestion that this is something that is structurally likely to grow as an industry into a large amount. But even given that, the small proportion of the population who do experience chronic and terminal illnesses are not necessarily likely to buy into this industry on a large extent. That is to say, most people who are in hospice aren't likely to think of selling off these things. I think firstly, this industry isn't advertised in the first place to a lot of consumers on like on average ground. And I think the reason for this is in order to be able to hide themselves from regulators, they had to hide themselves from regulators. So insofar as like they're able to just do like practices which allow them to make more money, I think they probably just don't advertise this very well, meaning that a lot of people don't necessarily know about it in a lot of instances. But I also think secondly, it's just the fact that people are naturally more risk averse to doing these types of things. That is to say, for example, like you have to give them like large amounts of data and things like this as well, like i.e. they have to know about all of your health and medical bills, also relating to your family and genetical history and stuff like this. I think people are generally quite risk averse with like giving out their data and things like this, or at the very least their family are likely to be risk averse with these things. But also like lastly, it's just like the case like, oh no thank you, the only ways that are advertised to people to end their insurance policies are through their general insurance brokers, who are like obviously don't have an incentive, who don't have an incentive for people to want to sell off their policies insofar as they're able to continue paying the premiums and giving them them to these types of people. So those people are aware of doing things like being able to terminate your policies, and this is likely a small industry. What this means, therefore, is that because it's a small industry, one, there's a lack of political capital to be able to properly regulate this type of thing. That is to say, it will take a large amount of political will for the government to spend, like, to hire like lots of really good like policymakers and lots of good healthcare professionals to be able to regulate this industry. Insofar as like there's more pressing issues, like for example, economic matters, housing crises, immigration crises, and all these other things, meaning that there wouldn't be ever enough political will. But thirdly, like secondly, it's just the internal incentive. Insofar as it's not a pressing issue that affects a large amount of the population, it is not something that's likely to affect voters or to be something that's proximate to most people on average, meaning therefore that it's something that typically the state just doesn't have an incentive to want to. So I've already proved why there's lack of incentive, also lack of capacity to regulate. And insofar as regardless of the incentives of this market, it just means that it only takes one or two bad nefarious actors to be able to come into this market.
You know what?
To change it. I'll take the point.
Yeah, why do you believe that you or the government is so much more intelligent than the average person that would be trying to sell their life insurance that you have to ban them from doing so?
I think the average person probably isn't like expert in like healthcare or regulatory or financial or investment or insurance policy. A lot of people take out their insurance policies without necessarily knowing what it means. The structural reason for this is that there's simply a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of specific jargon that people aren't able to understand. I think that this is already bringing me into the case as to why the market generally has bad incentives. I like has like bad incentives, why these things play out. I think the first reason they're responding to the POI, but also dealing with the substantive, is literally just the fact that people are less able to understand these contracts. I think it's also secondly just the fact that the investors who are making these contracts and putting them together have an incentive to burden you in lots of paperwork insofar as you're probably too busy being sick or your family's too busy caring for you to be able to read through these policies, meaning that simply they just like do this insofar as like you don't understand what you're doing and getting yourself sold into. But I think secondly, they just have an incentive to sell them at a very low discount. Why? There are very little alternatives who would have any amount of large financial capital to be able to buy out your insurance policy, meaning that there isn't a lot of actors who are already engaging with this for the reason that I've already explained, that this is a small market, meaning that they literally just have incentives to leverage your vulnerability and how desperate you are to likely do this, insofar as you're probably desperate to take out the life insurance to pay for some amount of medical treatment or palliative care, meaning that they're likely to give you a relatively low cost, which means you simply just have less money to be able to actually pay for this care and treatment. But also secondly, it means that after you die, your family is literally just left with less money to be able to do things like to organize your funeral, and your families are likely to be left likely to be left off worse. I'll explain a bit more, like a few reasons rebuilding why these are bad, but I think this is clear. OG win. Thank you.
I take my POIs verbally. Panel, do you know that OG never even explains us like substantially why it is so important to regulate those things? First of all, I don't know if it's something that comes up later about like how they are making profit off of suffering, but you know that like life insurance itself is also making a profit off of suffering. There is no like principal argument to be made in this case. And then there's a large like explanation about like how those like companies can like be very hostile towards those people and how the regulation is very hard. First of all, please do note that OG themselves concede to the fact that first of all, supply is low and people are unlikely to sell their insurance due to like different factors, which means that there is already like a very high burden to prove that like this kind of ban is even like needed if people are usually not going to be opting into this. First of all, a piece of framing. Where I'm going to explain to you why people are likely to like make a good decision when doing this process. If you have a family who you are close to, you are already unlikely to take this option. First, for example, terminally ill father probably cares for their children and the well-being of their children and family. They probably feel responsible for them. Different reasons why. First of all, just a similar like emotional connection, just the fact that you feel like you are the one who's supposed to be the caregiver. Secondly, close family is likely to like carry on your legacy. Being forgotten is something that's very scary, which means that like you're likely to be like prioritizing like staying close to them and being like in good terms with them. If you're actually going to like fuck over your family by taking out this money and making sure that they can't access it, you're probably going to like ruin those bridges as well. And thirdly, at the end of your life, you feel more duty towards the things that you have like legacy in, like just the fact that since you cannot do much anymore, you are going to feel more responsible both for the things that you already have done, which means that like caring for your family is already very important important for you. But what does that mean? This means that this option will probably be taken in circumstances where people are already not close with the people who would receive this money, thus probably are not dependent on this person and are not likely to like live with them, which means that like not receiving this money is probably not going to be very harmful for them. This means that this money is probably going to be taken by people who actually need it, and like the vice versa is not true. Panel, note that this means this system is already self-regulating. That is a very serious matter, and people are likely to be very wary about it. This means the question of regulation is really not important. And also just about the fact that you're not even getting small premiums, because OG themselves consider the fact that supply is low because people are unlikely to take this option, which means that there is like really not like many people you can choose between who would be selling their insurances, which means that you are likely to like offer them like fair prices. Yes, you're probably cutting some because this is as promotion, but like you're not going to be like fucking them over with this system as well. And second is just the fact that there is low risk for the buyer. You know that you're going to receive this money, which means that you don't really need to like make big like interest rates on those things. And in the end, companies don't want to be the ones who are like doing bad things to people who are dying. I think this is just like bad for public face. They don't want to be those things, especially if they talk about like big investment banks. Probably like public perception is at least to an extent important for you as well. So in this case, what I have proven to you is the fact that like the money that will be taken out is not going to be taken out hastily. But now I'm going to talk about why it is very important if you do choose to take this money out. First of all, about people, if you are a person who is not close to anyone really anymore, and you are like this money could help like make your life better. 2 points under this. First of all, it can help you with your medical issues. You can hire a caregiver. Do you know that like usually the family and like close people are the ones who are taking care of you? If you do not have those people, you need to make sure that your life is still like at the hands of someone who is like competent enough. You probably can like make the end of your life better with this money that you receive from those companies. And secondly, it can just like enable more pleasures for you. It can allow you to access experiences that you might not have had or might like or want to have. Like for example, go to Paris and see the Eiffel Tower. If you're already dying, I think this is something very good thing for a person who is already like at the end of their life. But secondly, if you are a person who is close to your family, but you still do make the choice to take this money out, this is probably very well calculated money, well calculated decision. Probably means that like to an extent at least your family is well off, but it could mean 2 things. First of all, the family like you could just like enable to experience things with the people that you are close to as well. Just the fact that you could like spend time with your family, maybe go travel with them, maybe do some other good things. This is already something good for the person as well. And secondly, it could like help this family take care of you as well, because taking care of someone at the end of their life is usually very expensive. You still have to like pay large medical bills and like maybe for the place in the like care home for them, which means that this family could like avoid taking out loans by just replacing the money that they would receive anyway, which means that in this case, this money can also be very important for those people and actually help their life a lot. Before I move on, is there any POIs?
Do people care more about themselves or their family?
I think this question is very loaded because there are people who might care about their family, but there are people also who might care about themselves. As I explained, there are reasons why you would be caring about your family. The fact that your family is the one carrying on your legacy, the fact that you have already invested a lot into them. This is something that it was your life's mission, which means that like when you are dying, you don't want to like let this thing go down the drain as well. Which means that if you are this person, if you're still close to your family, if you still feel this connection to them, you are going to be caring about them. But if you're not close to the family, you're unlikely to even be living with them. They're unlikely to be dependent on you, which means that if you don't care about your family, this is fine. If this family is not already helping you, if there are reasons why you would take this money out because you are selfish, it means that probably this family is not doing a very good job, and this means that you have the right to do this thing. So at the end of the day, your family has a long time ahead of them to like have more experiences that could be enabled by other things as well, probably unlikely to like be completely taken aback by the fact that you are dead, which means that there are other ways they could also access the experiences, but you are the one who is dying right now. We think that in this case, you can also prioritize your own well-being. And lastly, just about the fact that at the end of the day, this is an exchange of risk. This is a similar how you can like do currency exchanges or like credit default swaps. This just means that you are making the exchange for the money that you might could receive once you are dead. You're just making this a risk. They need to prove the specific right to ban this specific situation and like explain the difference between those things. Why does the fact that you are like you have you don't have asymmetric information, you know that you're terminally ill and the person you're selling your insurance to knows you're terminally ill, everyone has the same information. We see that this is like very like just like on financial terms a good and like valid contract to sign. We see that there is no reason to ban this panel. This could enable so much like happiness for the people who are already dying for all those reasons. Our position.
Okay, cool. Me again. POI's preference same as before, just shout them out. Cool. Let's deal with the responses that we get from opening opposition. I think firstly they say, PM concedes that this is a small industry. Why does the state have to ban this? Note that regardless of the size of the industry, the state has to still make sure that there isn't harm occurring to people. The issue is that the size of the industry means that there's often like little capacity for people to be able to meaningfully regulate this type of industry, especially at the point where there's constant people lobbying against this regulation who have more power and capital than the states that are typically trapped in debt. It means that regardless of whether or not the incentive is or isn't there, the capacity almost definitely isn't, and thus banning this is the only way to get rid of the harms that naturally and necessarily happen within the market that I've been able to explain to you. Note that regardless of this thing being small, it is still a potent impact that happens to people insofar as like people are literally just like stealing money from you. Families are often left in like pretty dire conditions insofar as like things like funerals and costs and stuff like that are pretty expensive. Oftentimes it's also things like breadwinners of families who pass away and have terminal illnesses who are unable to work. Like life insurance like is meant to kind of give you that money, and people are losing out on this. I think it's a really potent harm that happens to people. And thus when the private market isn't doing things that are good for people, i.e. like providing people actual good deals and things like this, and having things like competition, which is limited in a small market, it means the private markets then activate all of their bad incentives, which are the ones to just make profit solely, and thus the state has a duty to step in. The step in can't be regulation for the reasons I already explained to you. The step in has to be banning this thing overall. Secondly, though, I think they literally just say that everyone has access, there's no information asymmetry. This is literally an assertion. They say, because you know you're ill. The issue is you know you're ill, but you don't know how much your insurance brokers are necessarily going to pay you out. Because, like, guys, if you know what actuaries are, they're people who do a lot of maths and statistics and calculations to decide how much payouts actually happen. These people go to college for years and are specially trained. The average person, no less the average person who is terminally ill or their family, who on average just don't have this level of an academic degree, are not going to know this. On top of the fact that companies have an incentive to bury you with paperwork and jargon insofar as it literally means they're able to get away with scamming you better. They can do this because regulation is poor and competition doesn't heavily exist within this market.
Why?
Likely to know, thank you, be other firms who are going to outcompete you by offering more symmetric information. But I also think thirdly, it's just the fact that even if people do have the capacity, I think they're just more strung up in other things. They're likely they're likely vulnerable to sell these things for the reasons that OO tells you. They want to enjoy the last minutes of their lives. They want to do these types of things. They think that these are their last moments. These are the only way they can do things, and that they're likely to be desperate and not think through these things rationally. I think the state just has a duty to opt into this because the state knows it's people, they have to protect them. Okay, cool. What did they essentially tell us then? They just say that, this is good because people are opting into this. Again, I think I'm just going to do this responsively. Like, this is like responsive, but it also like, this is new substantive, but it's like explicitly responsive to opening opposition. And literally another reason why this is literally just bad is insofar it's likely to be coercive from a number of manners. Insofar as like, firstly, it's the investors in the market that are coming up to you and that are coming up to you and have all the bad incentives that I talked about and do these bad actions. But I also think it's, for example, their family members like they talk about. I think it's likely your family members are going to coerce you into doing these types of things. Insofar as even if they have good incentives, they think that it's best for you. They force onto you what you think that you want to do within your last lives. I think a lot of people who are in hospice with chronic illnesses are literally suffering through so much pain. Their bodies are literally debilitating. I don't think people, even if they want to go to crazy things like travel to Paris and stuff, probably realize that they don't have the capacity. A lot of people are actually bedridden at the point of where they're likely taking on these insurance deals, which is close to the end of their life and these types of things. So I just think it's likely that the incentive to do all the things that opening opposition talk to you about are relatively small in the first place. But I think people's families are likely to push and make them do these decisions. I think people with terminal illness are likely to give into these types of coercion insofar as, one, they're typically mentally and physically exhausted to be able to fight back and assert their own agency or ability to be able to have choice. But I also think, secondly, it's just insofar as they probably feel ridden with guilt because, oh, I am like diagnosed with cancer, I'm about to die, and make your lives worse and leave you behind and do all these types of things. So they likely there's likely this kind of imbalance of guilt that means that like people are able to worse no thank you into this. I just don't think, regardless of how this decision is made, I don't think a person is ever fully opting into doing this in the first place. But I think even if a person is fully opting into this, it's still coercive insofar as, for the reasons I explained to you, companies have like as an incentive to be able to hide information from you in very tactical way, like information from you in very tactical. And these are ways that are still able to supersede regulation. Even if you regulate, you still like are able to bury them in paperwork and jargon and things like this as well. So I think this is still able to stand. Closing, I'll take one.
Yeah. So why would these extremely vulnerable actors that you're talking about, the extremely bedridden in hospice, take these cash payouts when they could instead just wait for the larger life insurance payment? Surely these are not the actors that are relevant to this debate.
Bestie, you literally have to stand over your openings characterization, which is literally that people who are literally about to die would still take out this money because, well, I've already explained it to you. Their family is likely to coerce you to take out this money because they want you to continue fighting. They want you to take out money for more medication. They want you to take out money for more care. People are often positive and optimism biased. They believe that they could survive if they take out the money to pay for these drugs. If you get the money after you die, you can't pay for your care because you're dead, so you can't give medicine to dead people. I think this is pretty simple, and it's also consistent with the opening opposition's characterization. So you have to either, one, respond, or two, not them. I don't know, you choose. But anyway, I think simply I've just explained why this is likely to be coercive in a lot of instances. Yeah, there's all the principal harms that like people talk about, like, oh, this means it's just simply violating their agency and ability to be able to make any type of meaningful choice. And I think, yeah, maybe the state has to step in. But I think it just actively also has practical impacts insofar as people are coerced into making these decisions. It means if you care about how people live the rest of their lives, they're not likely to be to their fullest extent. Insofar as it literally just means like it's to their fullest extent. Insofar as it literally just means when people take out these deals, they're likely going to regret them later down the line. The reason for this is that people are less likely to be looking long term insofar as people are more worried and caught up about the last moments of the lives of these people or the fact that they're about to die, and are likely just don't have the capacity to rationally think long term, because when you're terminally ill, a lot of the time your brain capacity and cognitive function is actually decreased to a large ability, but also in terms of your family and friends and things like this as well. The same occurs to them insofar as like they're just likely irrational and likely emotional in these instances. So I just think in whatever instances is happening, it's already something where people are likely not thinking irrational in the first place, regardless of how well the market is regulated. It just means from the consumer side of it, their incentives, while like their incentives are also something that are likely to be skewed in all these types of instances and things like this as well. Did they like instances and things like this as well? Okay, lastly then, in terms of just weighing up the impacts, I think what opening opposition like simply is just telling us is that people are able to just use the money, they're able to live their best life and do the things that they want to do in their last moments, last moments of life, like they can travel and go to France. Again, why is this impact relatively small? I think there's a limited capacity extremely for hospice patients to be able to engage in these types of activities. A lot of time you're bedridden and not allowed to travel on planes and you can't actually do these things in the first place. But I think secondly, these things don't weigh as highly insofar as it means in long term the utility of your family or your assets and your like other things that you leave behind, you're just likely to be more screwed up insofar as when you die, the insurance company is the one who gets to pay out and not your family. And I think this weighs more heavily into the long term. So for all of these reasons, about opening government.
I prefer my POIs in chat, please. And I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, let's just address a massive assertion coming from opening government. They somehow seem to think that making irrational decisions equates with maximizing monetary value, but this simply isn't true, because how much capital you're able to access doesn't matter if you can't do anything with it. That is, if you're literally dead, or if you can't maybe have the last good memories that you could have with your family, if you can't access this better quality care at the end of your life to make it a little bit more bearable. Let's also look at the true burden of proof within this debate. We don't have to prove in any way that this is a good thing to do for most people. We already frame why it is unlikely to have a very high buy-in because of the specific perspective of a person who is about to die. OG comes in the second speech and they say well, no, actually these people are already kind of going mad and don't really understand it. I think this is just a really harmful generalization about people who are at risk of dying, but also they themselves in their first speech rely on the characterization that this is a small market, that the buy-in is difficult, because this is the whole argument about regulation. Therefore, we simply have to prove that there are situations where this is so important for it, and there aren't harms to other people from this, because there is a low buy-in in general. Let's see about the regulation. So again, because this is quite a small market, and we do think the buy-in is already quite high, we don't really see why regulation specifically in this area is important to a large degree. There's the characterization that it is bad because they're coercing you, they're going against your agency. I think that already assumes a certain set of characterization which is invalid in this debate. But then they also bring in this kind of the only harm they can actually claim is the family members having less money after you die. However, I think to have a practical harm in this case, you need to assume that the financial situation of the family is going to get worse after the person dies. This is unlikely to be true for two structural reasons. Firstly, you already are terminally ill. You probably can't work. You are not bringing in value to the family anyway. That is, there is no loss of incoming capital. No loss of a stream of capital for the family. Secondly, care costs are really high, and they're probably even higher than the costs of having a one-time funeral. Yes, we agree that having a funeral is difficult, hard, and emotionally stressful, but it is not as expensive as accessing care. It is not as expensive as accessing medicine. It is not as expensive as the years that lead up to a death. Okay, then they say in tension with that analysis, they say but you are really likely to be forced into this because your family members actually are pushing you to do this. I think this is already really strange, because if the family members are going to in your particular family situation, suffer so drastically from not having that money of life insurance, then we think it is unlikely that they would actively be pressuring you into it, because they are not terminally ill. They are probably going to see it rationally. Even if they do care emotionally a lot about you, then they still don't want to then they still are going to make the rational decision from the perspective of what values they think are important. That is, they're only going to pressure it for your benefit, pressure you into this for your benefit if they think that seeing you die happy is more important to them than having more capital in the end. Moreover, we also characterize that the loss in capital that is going to incur isn't likely that high, because as OG themselves say in the very first sentences, this is a good investment for insurance companies, but there aren't that many people offering it. That is, to access this pretty stable investment, you're not going to be able to make too much of a concession. I think even if people are worse at making financial deals than people who have been trained in it, they are still they're going to have proportionally more higher emotional connection to it, because they haven't been making it payments into these life insurances for decades, and this is literally their own life that they are talking about. That is, they are going to be much harder to win over with a small amount of money. Okay, then they say but these companies, these investment companies, are going to make money and this is bad. I know this is a bit of a silly thing to say, because investors are not just evil rich people in central London making money off of everybody else. The money they invest is often the money of people. That is money people have put in banks, or money people have put into pension funds. That is, if the money is actually better invested, it is more stable and more likely to make a profit. This is probably a good thing. Moreover, if it actually diversifies the investment, makes failure less likely, then we are even ever so marginally reducing systemic risk. We're reducing the likelihood of everything collapsing And then I don't know. I do think the delta is quite small on this case, but this if you are going to weigh it to a panel, it falls to our side. Okay, then they say like just a little bit more on the regulation. I just want to point out that if they have a fiat to successfully enforce the ban, that is, like, make sure that nobody is going to be like having these agreements, then we probably have like the fiat to take away the worst of these cases. I'll take a PI from closing if they have one. Opening.
Firstly, you don't have any fiat at 6 minutes in DLO to counterprop, but you also have to deal with the responses to why regulation is insufficient. You can't assert.
No, I can say that we don't need to regulate it because it is a small amount of people being affected by it, and they have very high buy-in to do it, and they are likely to do it reasonably well. Now, they say like, people are likely bad at decision making. Even if I buy all of this analysis, then like, the fact is that on their side, there isn't even a decision to make. That is, for some people, it is the right thing to take this agreement, and for other people, it is the wrong thing. But on their side of the house, the state is making the decision for everybody. And this is just like principally wrong. We think there's a fundamental value of agency here. Nobody else can truly access the unique experience of this dying person, and they have the right to make this decision, even if they are flawed in making it. Okay. And then just like to address the throwaway point they have of, we have more capital to pay for medicine. Firstly, we think people have the right to pay for medicine. Secondly, like having a lot of money to pay for medicine is in no way unique. People have like fundraisers, people have amassed capital. Like medicine is always going to cost a lot simply because like it is a thing upon which it is very easy to inflate the price. But for all of those reasons, so happy to oppose.
All right, I'm going to be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I'm going to be doing a couple of things in this speech. First is kind of a summary of the debate so far, then some rebuttal to CO, our CG, and then the Gov case as a whole. And then I'm going to be running 2 extensions on the argument presenting by opening opposition. One is a principal argument on property rights, and the second is an analytical extension about why people buy life insurance in the first place and how viatical settlements encourage people to buy life insurance. So first, some responses. Let's start with CG. CG's case is, I think, much more tenuous than they think, especially because we're talking about terminally ill, chronically ill people in this debate. These are people that are going to die, right? They're on the way to death. CG's case is essentially, when you have viatical settlements, people are more likely, because of emotional biases, to attempt to do experimental treatments that could save their life. Panel, I don't really see how this is a harm at all, to be honest with you. CG has some harms like, oh, well, they're going to die on the surgical table. I mean, I think people that are dying don't really care whether they die in a hospital bed or on a surgical table, right? And remember that there is an extreme benefit available to these people now because of the viatical settlements that CG is claiming are a harm. They could live, right? They could sell their life insurance policy and then live. They could, the experimental surgery could work. They could spend more time with their family. These are extreme benefits that CG just kind of washes away because these already dying people might die a little bit sooner, and they also have cash up front too. I don't think CG's harms are very clear at all. Moving on to OG. OG's case is based on 2 tenuous assertions. The first is that corruption is rampant and widespread basically everywhere in the world. And the second is that life insurance is very good. I'm going to deal with the second one first because I actually do agree with it. I think life insurance is a good thing. I'm glad OG brought this up. I think the benefits are extreme. The second is that corruption is everywhere. I don't agree with this. OG basically comes out and says, well, like, every single company is out to get you. The government is in the pocket of huge corporations. I think this is true to like some extent, but not to the extent that OG needs to achieve their harms. Because in a viatical settlement, what OG needs to get these harms that these companies are coercing you, they're drowning you in paperwork, they're getting you to do stuff. Basically, OG needs a bunch of really dumb people and a bunch of companies that control the government. I don't think this is an accurate characterization of how the world works. And let's also remember that these companies are going up against the biggest competitor of all, your life insurance payout, right? These companies have to compete with the fact that at some point down the line, you're going to be getting potentially, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars from a life insurance company. They're not just able to just walk in, hand you a bunch of money, and trap you in debt. Like, this is not some kind of like payday loan or whatever, right? There's real like risk reward calculations that people are doing. All right. And this thing brings me well into my first extension on property rights. So we don't really, in most countries that Western democracies, make people sell their stuff or prevent people from selling their stuff. We prevent people from buying things, as CG noted, things like buying alcohol until a certain age. But in general, if you want to live as a homeless person in your van and you want to sell your house and all of your property, we don't really have a problem with this because in general, it's a fundamental point of Western democracy that your stuff is your stuff and you can do with it what you want to do with it. I think that this just sends the government down, a very dangerous path where essentially they're saying, well, when the government thinks that people are too stupid or too coerced or too whatever to do what they want with their things, then the government is able to step in and stop them from doing stuff. Let's remember what OG is saying. There's a real trade-off here, right? That now, instead of having the option of a viatical settlement, the government is forcing you to either bail out of your life insurance policy or pay presumably really high premiums, maybe after your life insurance term expires, because you want to keep your insurance. Whereas under our side of the house, under the counterfactual, or under the status quo, I should say, you can now sell your insurance and not have to pay those premiums, send those premiums to an insurance company. You're free of the burden of the insurance premiums, and you get a cash payout. Under Gov's side, the government just kind of says, actually, I think you're stupid, and says, no, you can't do that. I think that this is absolutely a disgrace compared to everything that we stand for in the Western world and in democracy as a whole. Your things are your things. You should be able to do with your property what you want to do with your property, even if that means selling it. You have bought this insurance payout, but you wouldn't prevent you from selling a piano or a car or a house. Why is a life insurance policy any different? If you are in a very vulnerable state and you want to sell your car to, pay for your medical expenses, under side government's logic, The government should step in and say, no, what if your family wants that car? What if you need that car later? You're under emotional duress. You can't make these kind of decisions. I think Gov's logic is just fundamentally flawed and misunderstands how we operate in Western democracies. Your property is your property. Now, moving on to my second point here, I think that a general problem throughout this debate is that the scope is very small. Both sides tend to agree on this, right? Like for OG to reach all of their harms about regulation, they need like an extremely, extremely small market where there's not a lot of competition and you don't have a lot of options. Not a lot of people doing these settlements. For OP to reach their benefits, they noted that probably not a lot of people are actually going to be going for viatical settlements, right? That maybe it's people that are single or don't have a lot of family members, maybe their families are dead. All of these things, right? It's a very small number of people that would go for settlements. Although these harms and benefits that are more proximate, they're extremely limited in scope. Which is why I'd like to get into my second point here, which is that viatical settlements encourage people to buy life insurance in the first place. And this allows me to flip OG's benefits of the life insurance being good. So not taking the viatical settlements because you have life insurance. Well, why do you have the life insurance in the first place? Because of the presence of viatical settlements, right? Because of the viatical settlements exist as insurance on insurance. I'll give last chance to opening on POIs here.
Yeah, democracies are famous for taking a portion of your income as tax. You're not allowed to sell or use drugs that you own. There's obviously a limit to doing whatever you want with your own stuff. And that limit, like these viatical settlements, is when it's bad for you or others.
Yeah, okay, so government gives us two examples here, drugs and taxes. I don't think either of these are at all equivalent to a viatical settlement, right? Your viatical settlement it's not going to like cause massive harm to other people like drugs are. You're not selling heroin, you're selling life insurance, right? And you're not like kind of paying back to the government out of your income. You're not like giving back for what you take from government benefits like you do with taxes, right? This is completely different. Like I said, it's much more proximate to selling a house or a car, which the government does not prevent people from doing, because when you have this kind of actual property that isn't like, a part of the government taking it from you in taxes, we don't prevent you from selling it. That's a principle that underlines Western democracies. Now, getting back to this viatical settlement point. For example, if you are a single person, why would you buy life insurance in the first place? Because of the presence of viatical settlements, right? If you're single, who cares what you don't care about what happens to you after you die. You don't have any family members. So if we're all to access these benefits, right, of like single people selling their life insurance, they need to recognize that the whole reason they have life insurance in the first place is because of the existence of viatical settlements. And now you also are able to access all of the people that aren't terminally ill that now have life insurance anyway and are able to access the extreme benefits of life insurance, which my partner will get into. Thank you. Proud to oppose.
Okay, my speech starts in 3, 2, 1. So firstly, I'll try to further kind of impacting and extend my partner's, trying to kind of further explain my partner's extension, and I will integrate some comparative with other teams, so on. But after this, I'll try to kind of do a more team by team analysis, where I hope you can get more systematic weighing and comparison. My partner tells you three things in this debate. First is that the market, despite being small, there's still likely to be competition within the market, i.e. the patient will still, given the huge reward, there'll be probably a lot of investment banks wanting to get feedbacks, and with the competition, that potential means patient is likely to get a better deal than OG wants you to have. Second, on property rights. I think why property right is important is because it is a fundamental guarantee of your agency, of your liberty, given money is potentially what you need to do in a capitalist society. And why this is so important that we're not to ban it, for two reasons. One is that what's the right decision is so vague, because Bill Gates dropped out of school. School tend to be seen as a good thing, but he dropped out of school and become a millionaire. So in most instances, this is very vague and different from different subject. And second, what's the point of liberty if you can only make the right decision in the eyes of government? So believe this, banning this is a fundamental violation of your fundamental liberty, is infringe on your property rights. So we think this is itself is a debate winning point. But secondly, my partner tells you that this viatical segment encourage more people, like single person, my partner tells you, to buy life insurance because it provides you with a safety networks. Not everyone is having a loving, supporting family. Like for single person, they have to have a safe backup for themselves. Similarly, for old people, when they are like ill or whatever, when they are having a bad time with their marriage or whatsoever, they don't, with this viatical segment, they don't necessarily have to be tied up with those people for their support or for the potential of their support, because they know they are guaranteed of a sufficient amount of money, even though it's still a bit less. So this money, again, is being able to provide them more agency, more courage to pursue whatever they want. So I think this is why it is so crucial in this debate, because this settlement actually encouraged more people, because I think it's conceded in this round that all people are risk adverse. So because of that, more people are likely to buy this life insurance and have to guarantee the access to this viatical segment. I think this is ultimately going to benefit the wider group of people. And since more people are buying this, the market is likely to grow, meaning more competition are likely to be going in, and there is going to be more kind of explanation helping the dumb people, the OG wants to believe, to understand all these terms. So believe this will ultimately result in a positive loops that are helping all patients to make the best decisions for themselves. This is essentially one point how we always are opening, because we provide you a much wider scope that not only benefit the people they talk about, but potentially benefit and making them even better, but also benefit potentially a wider group of people. Now let's look at team by team analysis. First, CG. CG brings you this very weird case that because they're so desperate, they want the treatment. But however, I want to flip their entire case. If the patient is in such a desperate situation, you stopping her is much more likely to cause him immense mental harm, because you're literally taking away his only opportunity, even though that is slim. So we want to argue to you that that's actually more painful than letting him spending that money for that hope, even though that's irrational, even though that may not save him, because you don't want him to die in a very desperate and hopeless way. And that's why property right is so important, that we don't really need people to make all the rational decisions. That's why we don't ban advertisement. That's why we don't ban casinos, which all makes you want to do kind of this emotional bias decisions. So I think that's how we take out CG's case. Now, let's look at OG. OG first brings you the regulation point. I think this is fundamentally contradictory. First, because if they're so powerful, they have the government in their pocket, then how can the government ban this market in the first place? But second, even if it's bad, the government should try to do more regulation rather than just simply ban. Boeing is bad, but we should just try to make it better, right? But further, the point we give you, i.e., more people are buying this, more people are accessing that. The growth of the market is likely to solve all the harms that OG wants you to believe, anyways, because presumably there will be incentive for people to provide explanation because there are more people kind of wanting to access. They're wanting at least, because even though people are dumb, they're also wanting to know what they are getting themselves into, like life insurance, viatical segment. So there'll be more incentive or more monetizing reward for people to explain that. But also I want to know that fundamentally people are just not that dumb and the procedure is not that complicated. I.e., when you get life insurance, you can literally just ask for the money, like how much I'm going to pay out. You can ask a third party, like how much money I am going to get. I don't think it's that difficult for you to. And then you don't have to care about all the other jargon terms because you are going to die anyway, even though there's some traps that doesn't really matters to you anyway, right? And I think this is also kind of dealing with the market incentive. Even though some companies may have bad incentive, they may want to abuse your vulnerability, but presumably given they consider the profit is so high and so guaranteed, there will still be competition. There will still be a lot of other companies wanting to access that benefit. So therefore there will be a race, the competition, meaning to eliminate those extremely bad terms that guarantees that patient will at least get a sufficient or large amount of money. And this is also how we outweigh our openings, because this explains to you that people don't necessarily have to make the best decision with significantly expand the scope of benefit, because regardless if you're making the best decision for yourself and for your family, you are still guaranteed but a sufficient amount of financial reward. So this, I think, is fundamentally benefiting everybody. And what's left for OO? Yeah, so we always owe because what we prove to you is that people are able to getting more money, and people are more and more people are being able to get access to life insurance, which all we can see is sort of a good thing by the government side. So because of that, I think more people are. Because the growth of the market, because of growing competition, I think eventually more people will be able to get more money to fulfill the benefit that OO wants to access. So so our case is fundamental because we prove to how much money they can access, and this is the prerequisite to access their benefit. For all this reason, CO.